Yes, everyone, and welcome to the Irish Hotspur podcast. Sean Butler, who we know who's very familiar on this channel from Spurs Talk Show, is going to be filling in for Dave here. As you know, this is, of course, recorded offline. Bit of just a conversation between Sean and myself. We haven't done the podcast, I think, for about a week and a half, so plenty of things have happened. We have had, I think, the Frankfurt result. We, of course, had Everton win, and now this Manchester United defeat, which certainly puts a lot of things into perspective here. Sean, before we kind of get straight into things, I know you yourself actually weren't feeling very well yesterday, so it seems like there might be a bug going around. And I imagine the result against Man United that you probably woke up to didn't help much either.
Yeah, well, yeah. Hi, Jack. It's good to be with you, mate. Yeah, look, it's not been the greatest last couple of days for me. I've been feeling rubbish, but I did manage to squeeze. I was in bed watching the game. I managed to get it through my eyes before I sent lights out for the rest of the evening, and it was really disappointing. But it's interesting that you haven't, if you haven't done a podcast since before the Frankfurt game, then
A lot of good have happened, and then some bad
yeah,
happened.
yeah. So I guess it's better to reflect on everything rather than just last night's performance. Otherwise, we could be crying by the end of the hour.
Certainly, yeah, certainly. And who's to know whether we start with the crying or we start with the goodness. Maybe that's where we even start our talking point here, Sean, if you will. Is it feels like Spurs were maybe on sort of a groove, kind of going into that Man United game. I thought the Frankfurt performances were actually great in their own right. I thought Spurs put in more or less, or at least trying to put in 90-minute performances. It just felt like the strikers were sort of letting them down in those games. Then it goes into the Brighton game. The Brighton game was a fabulous sort of performance all in all, considering the circumstances and also considering what was sort of, on the minds of players and Conte. We then go into another Frankfurt game, which sort of was a spicy one and probably one of the more interesting games. Then we find ourselves at Everton, where we absolutely humble them. And it feels like Spurs kind of had a lot of momentum, you could say, going into the Man United game. And it was kind of disappointing to see it kind of maybe, I don't know, kind of just immediately fade away. So what's kind of on my mind right now, Sean, is even a particular person. I remember Jamie O'Hara was all over Talk Sport for basically defending Spurs' name and saying like Spurs aren't boring, Spurs aren't boring. And then like the following week, you find him calling Spurs boring and saying Spurs need to change the tactics. Do you feel like things right now are getting a bit, I don't know, how would you say, topsy-turvy when it comes to the vibe of Spurs, where all of a sudden felt like we had a groove? Maybe then everybody was getting on kind of the same side, and then this result happens, and it feels like kind of pandemonium again.
Look, mate, if I can speak freely, I feel like
Feel free, it's the podcast.
Yeah, I feel like within the Tottenham community on Twitter, there's encampments and there's like polarization. There's kind of very binary thought processes going on right now. That when Tottenham don't or do play well but get a result, it's a vindication and a validation of Antonio Conte's methods, and most people would tolerate poor performances if the results are positive. But the second that the wheels come off, the narrative changes very quickly, and then some people very quickly move towards to extreme measures like Conte out, which I didn't think was even a thing. I've been dabbling in Twitter recently. It's gotten really strong recently. I've seen loads of people saying that this is not the Tottenham and he's not worth the money, and that we can't accept this at Tottenham Hotspur. And then there's other people who are more entrenched in other, dare I say, agendas or just thought processes around the real source of the problems regarding why Antonio Conte can't allow us to play decent, exciting football and get the results is all because of the ownership. And I do feel like some of those people, not all of them, but a not insignificant percentage of those people are worried about diluting that message by offering any criticism or critical thought around the players or more importantly, the manager's tactics. And I just don't think that, for me, either camp have baked in any level of context. It's never one nor the other. In life, it's always a subtle shade of gray. And that, we've spoken about this so many times on your channel, Jack, that there is an allocation of blame when things go wrong.
Yeah.
But for example, last night, the performance was so abjectly and objectively poor that there's more than enough blame to go around. It doesn't have to be shoved all into one camp, whether you're Levy in or
I would
Levy
actually
out.
say almost not enough blame to go around. It's hard to divvy it out. You want to give it to every single person, like, and you're finding
Yeah,
that there aren't enough pieces of the pie left, in fact, with the blame, I think.
100%. And yet, but that's the thing. I feel like the mood in the camp, if you like, the mood in the fan camp, at least, is quite divisive and quite like I say,
Yeah,
binary, and it shouldn't be, right. There's
yeah.
definitely gaps within the squad. The club should invest, needs to invest to be able to give everyone the necessary tools to do the job, to meet the expectations of the fans that are always rising. But at the same time, there's more than enough room to have a little bit of doubt and concern around some of the styles of football, some of the
Yeah.
decisions that are being played. And also at the same time, I think we have to discuss and talk about, and I'm sure we're going to, the mindset of the players. What is this psychological barrier that stops players within the team that are World Cup winners, that are Copa
Mhm.
America winners, that are Champions League winners, that have won domestic cups and domestic leagues around Europe, around the world galore? Why is it when they put on a Tottenham shirt and play in a unified 11 that they can't seem to get this monkey
It's a
off their
really
back
good
and put
question.
out a decent performance away against top six teams? It's very frustrating.
It's a really good question. I actually heard a really good answer from it, so maybe we'll get to it quickly before I forget. But on kind of a few things that you mentioned there, which I thought were interesting, were especially even just the Conte out and kind of the polarness or the polarity of Conte out at this moment. It does feel like, I'll be honest, I have had my sort of blind, sort of puppy faith in Conte, and I find myself, sometimes kind of, what would I say, kind of hastening to kind of not maybe criticize him as much as I probably think I should in certain cases. And it is probably having to do with that sort of polarity that you speak about, where it's like if you maybe push too far, you feel like against Conte, you might get labeled as something like that you think might be untrue. But then also as well, I kind of find myself after last night, what was very funny was when I was looking at the Twitter reacts and all that sort of stuff, was felt like only a few weeks ago, the sort of like, comments and whatnot in YouTube were like, oh wow, if anybody says Conte out, I mean that's absolutely, incredible. That's absolutely delusional that someone would say that. Not real Spurs
Five
fans.
days ago,
Not
Jack.
two like 2 games later. It's all I can see
Yeah,
on Twitter. And also all I can see is even just recently, it was like, oh, Basuma will never find his true Spurs potential as long as Conte is here. And now you're just kind of finding like sort of scapegoatism with kind of either we're putting down Basuma in order to raise Conte, or we're putting down Conte in order to raise Basuma. It's also becoming this kind of competition of favorites, I actually find right now, where only just so long ago, everybody felt like they were praising Højbjerg. It was Salzburg, like Dave was saying, everybody was loving the guy. We, lose to Man United, and we're back to Pierre is the problem. Pierre is a robot. He
yeah,
can only do this. He just bows his head and listens to Conte, and it just feels like, I don't know, Sean. I felt like a lot was sort of undone, if you know what I mean, by sort of the momentum. And I actually feel like sort of Spurs fans were starting to come together with the
yeah.
results and everything. We started to see that, okay, if we kind of continue on this sort of path, we continue on this sort of momentum, like, who's to say we still won't be third or second even by the time of the World Cup, and we won't be into the knockout stages? And let's be honest, I mean, that sort of result against Man United does make you kind of have a big fat reality check, and it does make you have to look around and see maybe what is actually still going wrong. But it is sort of funny, like, how
Mm.
much I feel like we just repaired ourselves from what felt like a really horrible loss to the likes of Sporting. I remember things went really poorly there, and really, it felt like chaos after that. Felt like chaos after the North London derby. And I don't know how to say this, but this Man United one sort of feels like we're kind of back to ground zero, a sort of like
Yeah,
again, and back to where we're going to have to find a way, or at least hopefully Spurs find some results, and then we can maybe find ourselves maybe, how would you say, getting rid of that polarity and that kind of divisiveness that you were talking about, because I think it always comes out in these sort of results
it
because
does.
people
Yeah,
have to point to something. And you
yeah,
brought up that, at least me personally, I am much a everybody, like, you get a yellow card, you get a yellow card, you get a yellow card sort of kind of guy for the blame. I find it sometimes hard to pin it all on one thing or all on one
well, it should
person.
be hard to pin it on one thing, Jack. It really
Yeah.
should be, because it's never like in life.
But that's
You know,
part of the disagreements right now, even on Twitter and whatnot, is like, well, I kind of think it was down to the players. I think it was down to Conte. And then it's like, well, you can't just think that. It's also down to, the board.
Daniel
It's down to
Levy,
this
yeah, of
and
course.
or it's
Yeah.
down to Hoiberg and Hoiberg alone. Like, and it's become like the battle
For me, I
between,
think
is
that
it everybody or is it one thing now too?
it's definitely, in my opinion, it's definitely not one thing. It 100% is not one thing. And anybody that is, I believe, and listen, everyone's entitled to their opinion, Jack. And I would never step in the way of anyone that feels that if they genuinely, truly believe that the evidence has suggested that the only problem that is the reason why Tottenham are not winning trophies every year in, year out is because of one element in the club. If that's what they actually feel, then so be it. But for me, I genuinely find that most of the time people have narratives and then pick the information to suit the narrative rather than fitting their narrative around the information. And for me, like I say, I think that Daniel Levy, is somebody, and Enoch is somebody, and Paratici are people that are, they haven't necessarily identified the best players of late. They haven't necessarily put the necessary money up, and the players that have come in, a lot of them have been disappointing, and I'm sure we can talk about that in a second. But what I would say, just before we move into any other topic, I do think that whilst I thought that the performance last night was unacceptable, and whilst I think that that we can talk about the specificities of should Conte have given some kind of technical or tactical
Yeah.
change at the 60th minute rather than the 80th, or how much blame can we really put on his head because of the fact that Kulusevski and Richarlison weren't there. For me, I don't think any of those things were really why I'm upset today. I'm not upset because we lost at Manchester United. Like, we are still third. Manchester United, that have got their chest very much puffed out today,
Yeah.
they are still 4 points behind us. And they are now thinking that they're the best thing since sliced bread. We need to put things into context and recognize where we're at, and calm down a little bit. Like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But where I really find that the disappointment, for me at least, is so fine-tuned is not in the even the performance or the result. It's just the attitude, the lack of heart, the lack of drive, the lack of ambition,
Yeah.
the lack of passion, and the inability or the lack of willingness to get stuck in to any 50-50, any second ball, any time where there was a meeting of two players where one person may come off slightly weaker. The Tottenham player cowered away, and the Manchester United went in with a strong, head
Yeah.
down, chest out kind of mentality. And for me, that is where the disappointment. We often go to Manchester United and come away with nothing. We often go to Arsenal and come away with nothing. We often go to Chelsea and come away with nothing. For me, it's the mentality and the physicality that we didn't show. I don't
Yeah.
mind if you go and put in a fight. Last season, same fixture last season, we lost 3-2. Ronaldo got a hat trick. I was fairly proud of. I was proud
It
of the
was a
performance we
more
put in.
proud performance. Yeah, you're right. It was a more proud
There was the
performance.
excellence of one man, and
Yeah.
overall, we got bested on the day. But yesterday we went in there and there was no desire,
Yeah.
no belief, and no passion. And for me, that is the one takeaway which really concerns me. But at the same time, I also want to recognize that I've been on top six shows today with other fans from other channels, and they're all very much mocking and laughing at us now. But I want to remind them and everybody else who might be listening to this that Tottenham haven't had to play a single top six team at home yet. We have a fortress at home. We've struggled away from home. That's fine. That's almost typical. But those teams that are crowing right now, Arsenal, Manchester United, none of those teams have played anybody at home, away from home, and come away with any particular points. Arsenal have played away from home
Didn't Weird
and
Time
lost.
TV put out a stat, I believe, just today that basically no team has really yet, toppled over another, top six
Yeah,
side. Really, like, it really has
100%.
yet to happen. And also, we've kind of come to notice this season that this is probably a more difficult Premier League season to guess each and every game. It feels like it is more of the cliche being true of there is no easy game in the Premier League. That, I would say, is more true than ever this season. And
Yeah.
perhaps that reflects not only with the teams at the bottom of the table, with how sort of like topsy turvy it is there, but also just in the case of that, no top six team has beaten each other away from home yet in this situation.
Exactly.
So I think another thing, though, Sean, that you were talking about with the lack of will, the lack of grit, all that sort of thing, that where the confusing part lies is we sacrificed having an extra attacker to have that extra will, to have that extra grit via those extra midfielders. And it then kind of makes me point to, I don't know, there's something that people are bringing up on the Twitter Reacts, which was sort of like Spurs' mentality going into these sort of games where they say, like, why is it against the likes of Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, that they sort of seem to play, the occasion or whatever it is, and not the game. They seem to get into their heads. They seem to maybe cower a bit. And whereas when they come up against Liverpool and Man City, it feels like Spurs all of a sudden kind of develop superpowers as of sort of
Yeah,
recent with the way they play them. And someone said it actually has to do with the sort of underdog mentality versus kind of siege mentality, where under Poch, someone brought up, I believe his name was Rob Domino in the comments. He said that under Poch, we started to develop a very good sort of underdog mentality where we would come up against these let's say bigger teams, but with the way that we played, the sort of young and naivete of the team and Poch and everything, there was this sort of underdog mentality. But since kind of the hiring of Jose and the hiring of Conte, we sort of like drastically moved away from that sort of underdog mentality. Where now, like, you're having these sort of alpha male sort of kind of coaches in the dugout that expect you to behave more like winners, to expect you to behave more like champions. And I kind of am all behind that, because that's probably what's needed in order for Spurs to achieve what we want to see them achieve. But maybe what's happening is part of the reason we seem to cower in these sort of games, or at least in particular to certain opponents, is because of this sort of like underdog mentality that might still be in some of these players. And they still kind of, when they come up against the likes of Chelsea, they still find themselves getting a bit nervous. They find themselves getting a bit shaky. But when they
yeah.
come up against a Man City or Liverpool, teams that pretty much no team expects anyone to beat, all of a sudden kind of the pressure is off. And it is kind of, a one hit, or it is kind of, just a go for it. And we all of a sudden turn into one of the best teams in the league in that sort of kind of performance. And I thought it was actually kind of interestingly
It's an
true. And
interesting point.
I think it, maybe not even true, just something as a potential answer, as a potential theory to why Spurs don't show up in games like this. But then all of a sudden, when we come up against Man City, I imagine it is going to be another 3-2 win, 90th minute, like, kind of game. And it's interesting,
Yeah,
Sean. I
but
don't know what your thought is on that. It comes
the
from
in,
the Poch era, he was saying too.
the individuals that Tottenham have in our team now are, I believe, more mature, and that have I don't have the stats or the data to verify this, but I would imagine, I could be wrong, but the team that under the Poch era probably didn't have as many characters in that had won, significant honors, either as individual accolades or in teams
True.
that they weren't under Tottenham Hotspur. Right now, we have World Cup winner, we have 2 World Cup winners, we have Copa America winners, we have winners of serial domestic cups in other
Yeah.
leagues, and also national championships in other leagues, right? And so
Also
every
captains of their respective national sides in some
yeah,
cases
like
too.
if you were to use that kind of that anecdote or that idea and apply it to people like Jed Spence or Oliver Skip, I'd say, okay, that makes sense, right? They want to be, they're kind of, they're up for the fight, like what Leeds kind of did or do or try to do that kind of
Sure.
that
Yeah, that's
effort.
a good
I get
example.
it, but when you have the likes of Perisic in the team and Hugo Lloris and um,
Yeah.
Højbjerg, Sonny, all those guys that have won they've won things for other clubs that I don't understand. For me, it doesn't quite add up that when they pull on a Tottenham shirt as a unified 11, all of their
Mhm.
individual history goes out the window, and then suddenly this ethos, this kind of hex or voodoo comes over the team and says that no, this particular, because last night was the first time that particular 11 had played against Manchester United away. And
Mhm.
there might have been various people that had played in that team before last year or the year before that, but last night was the first time that specific 11 started against Manchester United at Old Trafford, and yet once again the same old thing happens. And so for me,
Mm.
I don't understand. I wish I understood sports psychology to be able to kind of to
Yeah.
give some clarity on why it is that individuals that have got all the success under their on their various um the various CVs, why it is that when they come into Tottenham that they can't seem
Yeah.
to put it together. It doesn't make sense to me. I wish I understood it.
Do
It's very frustrating.
do Spurs, do you think, struggle with like having, I don't know, like do we struggle with bringing in these Joses and these Contes that basically do demand the exact opposite of the sort of underdog mentality. They pretty much want Spurs to develop into a complete different mentality, the mentality of a Manchester United, the mentality of a Chelsea, where you want pretty much everybody on the phone saying this is Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, after each and every
Mm.
result. And it seems like maybe is it the players, Sean, that are sort
Well,
of not adapting to that, or is like you said, there are certain new faces in the team that aren't from the era of Poch and whatnot that have come in that are somewhat suffering from the same thing, which is kind of peculiar.
yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced that Conte or Mourinho, whilst they bring with themselves that kind of winners mentality, I'm not entirely convinced by the style of football that they set us up to play, that they actually have that faith in the players that we have to be able to do
Okay.
that. If they thought, Conte generally setting up with the park the bus mentality, Mourinho setting up with the same sort of thing. If they genuinely thought that the players on the pitch had enough about them to go out and to deliver that success, that winner's style, then they
They
wouldn't
would open up a
necessarily
bit more.
they wouldn't ask us to be so defensive, because setting up that way demonstrates, in my mind at least, an internal fear that Conte looks at, or Mourinho looked at, and says this team is better than us on an open game, and
Yeah.
therefore we need to sit back and protect ourselves and then see if we can do better on the break. If they genuinely had the faith in the players, then I don't think they would necessarily ask us to play the way that they do.
Yeah, and with Conte's sort of words last night as well, which I've only kind of seen sort of the text of, it's hard to know whether Conte really does exactly believe in the players and maybe the way he's believed in his players in the past, which is also sort of a concern. And there is maybe also maybe a need for a call to patience. Like the longer he is here, maybe the more players like a Perisic and Højbjerg that he's able to bring into the team, and then there can be more of a kind of a cohesive mentality there. But I do find it a bit odd, though, at the same time that there are maybe players like a Højbjerg last night, Sean, that I thought even kind of cowered themselves. And I think maybe Højbjerg is allowed, of course, to do that. Like he has had a terrific season so far. But I do find it a bit odd that maybe there have been some players that we do know have a strong backbone and do kind of have a strong sort of, at least we think, kind of mental fortitude, all kind of seem to disappear. And a lot of people, even last night, saying Sonny and Kane really disappeared as well. And that was kind of a shame. I sort of, with my rose tinted glasses when it comes to them, didn't think they were really all that poor because I didn't think they
Yeah.
had that great a service, to begin with. So I kind of didn't really feel that much of a need to get sort of angry with them. But of course, I have my biases. But I just sort of felt like, Sean, there were players that we know normally wouldn't maybe disappear and normally wouldn't have that sort of poor mentality that all of a sudden kind of did in that game. And that's where, is it alarm bells? I'm not sure. It just more maybe speaks to there is something kind of always lingering, it feels like, at Spurs that leads to kind of the S word, the Spursy word, about them, that it just feels like needs to be eroded away. And so maybe just to kind of finish on this sort of mentality subject, Sean, maybe
Yeah.
unless you have some extra comments on it, do you feel
Well,
like
yeah.
Conte or Mourinho, is Conte or Mourinho the right type of people to erode that mentality? Is it the responsibility of the managers to erode that type of mentality, if you get where I'm going?
Yeah, I do. I understand where you're going with it. I do think it's look, everything starts from the top, right? If you've ever
Sure.
worked in a large organization, then, for me, I've worked for, I don't know, I've had 10, 15 different managers in my day, and some of them have got the very best out of me. Some of them have had the very worst out of me,
Mm,
depending on whether I believe in their model, believe in their ability to communicate, and whether I have faith in their process. And so I do think that the manager is more than just a tactician. I do
yeah.
think he is someone that needs to breathe life, energy, and belief into the team that he's working with. And like I said earlier, like, I'm not doubting Conte. Like, we spoke about this at the very start, right? There's this narrative around, you have to be in one camp or the other. Like, if you
Yeah, you
are
spoke
someone
about
who
the
wants,
gray area. Yeah.
if you want Levy out, then you have to back Conte. If you don't want Levy out, then there's room for you to criticize Conte, but then that gets shifted into Conte out. For me, I'm somebody that I don't care about the ownership. If there's somebody that's better that can come along and do a better job, then show me who that person is. And if they're there, if they're available and interested, I'm all for it. But until that time happens, I don't think that there was that much point in wasting time and energy talking about owners that aren't going to leave until the right price is met. And so let's focus on what we can focus on. And I don't want Conte to leave. I don't know who's going to come in that's better than Conte, but I do, and I am capable of looking at Conte's style of play and being frustrated and thinking that the team that we have are more capable than the roles that are associated. And so, to answer your question directly, I do think that the faith and the belief has to start with the manager, because those people like Kane, for example, are only happy to be at Tottenham right now because of Conte, right? So there is a natural, distribution, a diffusion of faith and confidence that comes from the top to the bottom. But what I would say, and this might be a transition into, I don't know if this is the next thing on the list, but let me run with it and then see if. So I do think that, a lot of people yesterday I've seen a load of people on Twitter saying, you wanted 3-5-2, you got 3-5-2, it didn't work, now what? And there's that kind of loaded question. For me, I do think that, I've heard Conte talk about the specificities of specific roles and that, people like Eric Dyer, the back three, the center of the back three,
yeah.
It's a very, very technical role that you can't just come in. You either have to know it or you have to learn it, and, blah, 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 blah. When we went to 3-5-2 yesterday, we saw, in my opinion, a different version of the 3-5-2 than we saw in the second half against Everton. In the second half against Everton, there were very specific roles given to all three of them. Højbjerg and Bentancur were given a little bit more liberal freedom to move forward and to do what they wanted to do and connect the dots with the forward line. And they had the luxury and the protection of Bissouma, who was told very acutely, sit back, protect the back three, and make those connections happen. Yesterday, I didn't see that. What I saw was a very horizontal line of Højbjerg on the left of the middle, Bissouma in the middle of the middle three, and Bentancur on the right.
Nothing like the 3-5-2 we'd seen before.
Nothing at all. And it was very zonal. And it was, all three of them were given the role of the box to box. On you, Højbjerg, have to take Fred's side. You have to take Casemiro's side, and you on the right has to take, whatever, right? And I thought that allowed Fernandes to have all the space in the world behind. All three of them were given the role of being up the front and at the back. That whole zonal role in the midfield three, it doesn't work. It didn't work for me. When I saw it within 10 minutes, I was like, why are we doing this version of 3-5-2? That wasn't the 3-5-2 we did last time.
Too complacent.
Yeah. This is a new experiment, and all three of them didn't know, without trying to swear, their ass from their elbow. There was no continuity. Yeah. There was no chemistry. They were all playing a new system, and I didn't like it. And so people that say, well, you got your 3-5-2, that wasn't the same 3-5-2. That was an entirely new 3-5-2. And I don't think that you should experiment.
Doesn't mean it's dead and buried. Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's 100% not. But I don't think you should be experimenting with new systems for the first time away from home at Manchester United.
Interesting.
That's absolutely crazy.
Maybe he just really made a significant tweak to that we hadn't seen before. And perhaps what it was is he really had only started with the 3-5-2 in the Brighton game. And the Brighton game, I'll be honest, I think it was a well-controlled game by Spurs ultimately, but it wasn't exactly the prettiest performances there either. But what I agree with you is I think we were kind of maybe quick to sort of kind of maybe write off the 3-5-2 after that. But while forgetting that, we've seen some really good moments from the 3-5-2 this season in the cases of Leicester, in the cases of, like, we saw the 1-0 win against Brighton, and we saw that it practically won us the game against Everton switching to the 3-5-2. So maybe there's something to be said about the 3-5-2 has been maybe proven to be more effective when we switch to it in a game. But I'd still like it to be just as effective if we started with it. It's what's interesting though then is where we find ourselves is this was the formation that I think we all called for, and this was the formation that we all knew was the right one going into it. And I do agree though, Sean, that there are some peculiar kind of questions about all this where it's like, if that's the system that we all wanted, if that's the system that Conte clearly wanted, what sort of went wrong then? Like, why did it go wrong this time when we knew it was supposed to be the right formation for today? I think a lot of it does have to do with that was complacency of the midfielders. And actually, if anything, when I do look at like the overall performance, while I think Dyer and Davies were very much responsible for the goals and did not cover themselves in glory in certain defending moments, if you really just look at it systemically on the day, it sort of felt like the midfielders were kind of the ones that disappointed the most, mostly because they were the ones that were kind of supposed to win us the game. In fact, like having those extra midfielders gave us the chance to win the midfield battle. By
Yeah.
winning the midfield battle, we maybe give ourselves a better chance of winning the game. But ultimately, I feel like the midfielders sort of let us down, whether that's partially due to their own will and grit and kind of effort. I think a huge part of it did, because I'll be honest, I did not see the same Højbjerg that I'd seen in previous games, did not see the same Bentancur, nor the same Basuma that I'd
But they
seen
were
in
playing
previous
in
games,
weird
but
roles,
also
Nick.
could have to do with that tweak that you said, tactically maybe too.
If you remember when we played the 3-4-3 last season and we had Doherty on the right and Decky in front, the right side of that midfield it wasn't Bentancur, it was Højbjerg.
Yeah.
Højbjerg played on the right of the two-man in midfield. Bentancur played on the left. I know it was obviously interchangeable, but to play Højbjerg on the left and Bentancur on the right and Bissouma in the middle of a zonal three where they all had to cover their own areas. It was, like I said, it was an experiment. I hadn't seen it. I don't think it's the right time to experiment with new systems. I think it would have been I think it could have been, not saying it would have been, it could have been much more effective if you just given Basuma the role of sitting in and looking after that zone that Fernandez occupies, and then allowing Højbjerg and Bentancur to go toe-to-toe with Casemiro and Fred. I think it would have been a little bit different. I think. I don't know. Who knows? Because at the end of the day, I don't think it necessarily was the formation. I think it was the players' mindsets and the mentality. But whether or not the mindset and the mentality and the energy, the ambition, all that stuff that we've spoken about was disrupted by the fact that there was three men in midfield that were playing an entirely new model of linear, horizontal, zonal kind of positions. I don't understand why we did it, whether it had any impact. But beyond that, I do 100% agree with you that Dyer looked poor. He was positionally naive, and I think that Davies also had a torrid time. But at the same, I would also say that there's criticism that I want to throw towards Perisic, because whilst I thought he was probably our best player going forward, the amount of times that
I think he's wasted chances is what it is.
His wasted chances. But on top of that, Antony, everybody knows that Antony is an £85 million player that has one foot, and it's his left foot. And Perisic is somebody who's been around the block so many times. He's old enough, he's wise enough, he's experienced enough, and he's intelligent enough to know, he should have known, that Antony's going to always try to come inside on his left foot, because that's the only foot he has. And Perisic constantly dabbled with him, not knowing which way he was going to go. And every single time he allowed the guy to come in on his left foot. And to me, that was naivete, and that was something that should have been avoided. And, two or three of the chances that Manchester United had started and finished with or without Antony getting that chance to come inside. And I think that was something that needs to be called out, that Perisic should have known better. It'd be different if it was somebody that was new and that was naive, but he's so experienced. He doesn't have that excuse.
Yeah, I just want to bring, I can't wait to talk about this fullback thing, but just want to bring, things around. Kind of funny that we sort of, like you said, we said a lot of the midfield problem had to do with the lack of will, like the lack of energy and, just not showing up to the occasion and not showing up mentally there. But like we kind of brought up in the very beginning, you can't just point to one thing though as being the main issue.
Right.
So there also could be an explanation. That the explanation is definitely there, I think, with the effort and with the overall effort of the players, especially from the midfielders. I think that is a good explanation, but also maybe part of that effort could be explained, or that lack of effort, should I say, should be explained by maybe the tactical kind of tweak that you maybe said with Conte. And I think it just comes back to our original thing that we were saying. You can't just put it all on one piece. You can't put it all on one thing, especially with a game like that. It really felt like you couldn't put it all on one thing type of performance. It wasn't like a Hugo clanger that we could just say, well, that lost us the game. Maybe consider getting a new Hugo. It really felt like, it's a whole mixed bag with this one. But on this Perisic, kind of thing, Sean, it was funny because someone brought up today that, do we kind of maybe abandon Perisic as the main left wing back, because he has been a bit disappointing defensively. I think with the chances he's had going forward, he has also sort of disappointed. What's funny is that he does really well at getting space for himself. Like he does those step overs. His defender looks a little confused. He's usually able to kind of create a bit of space or skip right by them. It's just sort of that after moment, that final hit or that touch or whatever it may be, just kind of lets him down. It's actually, what's shocking is I really just want to see him at one stage just take it past his man and just absolutely drive a shot across the keeper's goal like we've seen him do before, but he's yet to do that this season.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I thought Sean too, some of the times when he did get into a good crossing position, he sometimes kind of really underhit the cross from a few one of them. Like they were really dramatically underhit, I thought.
Yeah.
And it just feels like Perisic is a player that we kind of all these things we credited him for, experience, that ability to go forward, kind of, natural wing back. He has sort of underwhelmed, I think, in those areas. And I think it's okay to be a bit underwhelmed with Perisic so far this season. I actually think
More than
it
okay,
was a
mate.
bit similar. Yeah, you're all going to be more than underwhelmed. And with also Perisic, the North London derby kind of came to mind with his Man United chances, because when you do look at Perisic, he did have some of the better chances on the day. And it felt like that in North London derby as well, where he kind of just made a real mare of the chances that he had, that you sort of forget about it as a fan. But then when you really look back on it, you're like, wow, for a guy of his ability, like you were saying, Sean, a guy of his expertise and, experience, should have done a whole lot better. And I think the
Yeah.
Arsenal chance when he just shanked it near post,
Yeah.
that was real clanger. And I also thought two of those moments with Man United, I thought were kind of a bit dreadful, if you ask me, because the one where he skipped past Dallo, only then to just have that kind of just touch that you or I would have like in the box right afterwards, was a bit disappointing. And then another one where he cut inside to have a hit, and it was just really just disappointing. And
Yeah.
even Doherty too actually had a good chance, I think, as well to score. But Perisic, like we're saying, though, we know is a brilliant player, and we know is a player capable of so much better, which is why you kind of separate him from the Emersons and the
I think
Darcys
we
of the
know he
world,
was a
because
brilliant player.
he's capable of better. He's capable of better.
I think we know he was a brilliant player, but I haven't seen him. Um, I know he's got a couple of assists that have come from set pieces and things, and I don't want to hate on him, because listen, my frustration with with the performances is, like we've spoken about this. It's very continuous across most of the players in the team. But you look at some of the players that we've signed in the summer, and those people that want to push certain agendas will say there's nobody that's come in and interrupted the first team, and that's a problem. And I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but
I just
uh,
disagree with it. But yeah, go on. Yeah.
but a few of the players that we signed should have and could have interrupted the first team if they were to live up to the expectations that we have of them. And for me, Perisic, I think he's woeful defensively. I think Sessegnon is clearly better than him defensively. And going forward, I think that Perisic, I think he runs at a canter. I understand he's 30, whatever he is, 37. He doesn't run at a pace. He runs at a canter. He has this languid step over thing, and he can create space for himself, to your point, and he can get himself into good positions. But ultimately, the final ball,
He's
9
wasted.
times out of 10, is wasted. And it almost looks like he's putting it into the area, kind of going, I'm just doing my job here. And putting it into an area knowing full well that it's not going to be met by anybody. And I don't think necessarily it's the best use. I've been relatively disappointed most of the time with Perisic's efforts. The same with, not to get off the point, not to get off the topic, but just whilst I'm talking about it, I think that we have to take some time here to recognize that the transition of some of these players into the new Tottenham team, Basuma hasn't been great. Richarlison hasn't been great. Perisic hasn't been great. Jed Spence clearly hasn't been great on the training ground. Otherwise, he would have had more minutes than he's had. And then the only signing that we've had that I think has come in and that's done a good enough job to be like, okay, that was good business, or that was at least it hasn't let us down thus far, is Clement Longley. But I'm also very much of the mindset that you shouldn't judge a window until 6-9 months have gone through, and then you can reflect and say, well, how do they do? Because it's all early, and there's a long list of players that have come from.
Good example would be, because all of a sudden everybody's like, Skamaka, what a player.
Yeah.
Like I just heard that the other week, and I was like, that's funny, because just 2 weeks ago it felt like everybody was saying David Moyes would never give him a minute because he was shit. And
100%.
Then the next week it's like, oh, Skamaka, what a brilliant player.
100%.
It's one of those.
This morning everyone's talking about Darwin Núñez for Liverpool. Like, really? Okay.
After he's been the laughing stock of the last few weeks.
Right. Raheem Sterling at Chelsea. Cucurella at Chelsea. There's a long list of players that have moved, and I'll talk about Jack Grealish to go to Man City. There's a long list of players that have made big money moves or that have come into clubs with high expectations that just haven't necessarily transitioned. And I think it's too early to call them out and say that they're failures or that they've let us down. But at the same time, thus far, a lot of people that want to blame Daniel Levy or blame Paratici or blame the transfer window for not having the necessary tools to be able to look and play better football. I think that some of the players that we brought in that people had higher expectations of haven't lived up to those expectations yet. And so once again, those are factors that need to be added into the allocation of blame pie that we're trying to figure out. Well, why is it that Tottenham aren't playing better football than we are? And why is it that we were so disappointing last night? There's another couple of reasons right there.
I just kind of also, though, when it comes to those signing, Sean, that you mentioned, I feel like where some people have maybe forgotten is that Spurs did something also. Like, there were a lot of things that Spurs had done in this transfer window that were kind of big firsts that I feel like we've quickly forgotten. The fact that we got signings in for Conte right away, literally achieved practically 6 signings before the preseason, exactly what we all thought we wouldn't be able to do. And I think plenty of people said, no way, Spurs are going to do that. They did that. Another thing, though, that I noticed about some of those players you mentioned, while they have all maybe underwhelmed in their own kind of respective way, you kind of look at those players and they're all big recognizable names that have carried reputations like across their careers. They're not like, sort of, I hate to roast my own channel, the flat cap Euro talk sort of players of the world that are very niche and like no one really knows about. Like you just said, this is Perisic, who's like been one of the best Croatian national players of a long time and has been a leader for that side alongside Modric for a long time, has won a Champions League with Bayern, and in fact actually sort of displaced, I believe it was like I think it was Leroy Sané or whoever it was at the time, basically to win that Champions League. He did exceptional, has played exceptional at Inter and whatnot. Then you look at the likes of Richarlison, who's been kind of just at the end of the day a proven Premier League player and has proven to be able to succeed as a striker in the Premier League. And with that sort of signing, what I remember is a lot of people, when I asked Sean, I would say to them, what is the sort of signing that you feel like Spurs need to get? And no matter what maybe your thoughts were on a creative midfielder or Dave's thoughts on a center back or whatever, there were a lot of people that were like, I just want to get this number 9 issue fixed. I want to get this backup number 9 problem solved. It felt like Spurs achieved that with Richarlison. Big name, big number 9, and a guy who's very comfortable playing as a striker. Also, the reason why even some people leaned away from Gabriel Jesus was because, like, no, I want a conventional number 9, so we don't have to talk about that any longer. It felt like we achieved that. Basuma, a player that basically everybody rated higher than Højbjerg, other than maybe Ellie and a few others.
Yeah, exactly.
Has not displaced Højbjerg and has not displaced Bentancur. So there is like some things to be said about, we did buy players that had reputation. We did buy players that had actual things to point to for why maybe Spurs were going after better marquee players. And I just think we've also forgotten that these players have, like you said, underwhelmed, but that might have to do with a bit of Conte's sort of adjustment period. But you just sort of look at that and you're like, you can't really blame Spurs for going after players that are genuinely good players. Like, look at Richarlison.
No,
it's like, that's a guy who has reputation. If it goes wrong, you can't blame them because it's not a Darwin Nunez, like an absolute, I hate to say it, nobody that they spent 70 million on. It's a proven Premier League player. You look at Basuma, proven Premier League player. You look at Perisic, a guy that's, like you said before, underwhelming, but was supposed to bring all this experience, was supposed to bring all this stuff. And I think it's the same story with Basuma and Richarlison, where it's like they're supposed to be bringing all these things, and it's proven there is something to point to why we were supposed to think they were, they're bringing these things, and they just simply haven't. And what is that down to Levy? I don't think so.
This is the thing, right? So there's some people that
they should have the responsibility.
There's some people that have the agenda that want to push it on. That he didn't back us enough. We didn't get enough players, and then those players that we did get haven't made any impact. And I always would say, on that basis, it's one thing if Daniel Levy and Enoch don't pony up any money, or that go for the lesser option. And on those, and there's a few examples of that in the history of Tottenham Hotspur, where you can say, okay, Daniel Levy, that's a part of your con list. If we're going to allocate things that you've done well, things you haven't. That goes into the things you haven't list. And then you go, okay, well, if it's not them to blame, then is it the person that they've employed to be able to identify the right talent to come in and make an impact? And on this basis, that would be Paratici. And I think that that maybe, right, that's a maybe.
In Paratici we trust.
But in Paratici we trust. On your channel, that's the motif. But who knows, right? Time will tell. It's very difficult to judge a director of football. I think it's difficult to judge them anyway, because if they buy players that look good, like for all of the intents and purposes, that tick every box, like a Perisic. Okay, we don't have a left wing back that we can identify right now that's good enough right now, but we're going to go and get Udogie, but that is contingent on him staying with them for a year, but we think he's going to be the future. Okay, get that done. And we don't know in which order the decision was made. We have no idea of the intricacies of those deals. Yeah. Maybe it was, we've identified Udogie as the future left wing back of Tottenham Hotspur, but we can't get him unless we loan him back. Okay, well, let's do that. And then let's go and get Perisic for the next 12 months because he can give competition for Sessegnon, whatever. Right? So you tick all the boxes. And then Perisic comes over and everyone's like, okay, this guy's the business. Look, he was the #1 assist guy in Italy last year. He's still doing it. He's always fit. He's a World Cup winner, all that stuff. And then he comes in and he's just a year older than he was last year. And at 37 or however old, how old is he? 36, 35?
34, 33. Yeah.
However old he is, that year suddenly has more of an impact. And the transition from the Serie A to the Premier League, where it runs at one point, it's like watching a YouTube channel at 1.5 times speed, right? It's a little bit more demanding. Maybe Perisic doesn't work out. Is that on Perisic, or is that on Paratici, or is that on Levy, or is that on Conte? Because all four of them have had an influence in making Perisic be our signing on the left wing back. And I'm not even saying that Perisic hasn't worked out yet. Like it's still a little bit too early for me to tell. I'm just saying that thus far, what I've seen of him, he hasn't been the explosive generator of 4 or 5 goals and 15 assists that maybe some of us hoped he could have been.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you allocate the blame. All I know is that you don't push it in one direction, Jack.
I think that's been the main takeaway from this one, and I love that that's somehow been the theme that we've uncovered from this conversation here, Shawnee. And what I might just quickly add to that whole thing is I just sort of feel like we are going to be maybe quickly too judging the transfer window. I'm actually fully welcome to listen to the areas that we might have missed out on, the areas we didn't address, the areas that we probably could have done better. I think it's actually more of a fun conversation. I enjoy that conversation because even just today, Sean, I was kind of talking about like, do you know what? Now with hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, seeing that Richarlison wasn't adapting to the winger position as much as we like, and seeing that Kulusevski has been injured, maybe we did need another player that could make the 3-4-3 work in the way that Kulusevski does. Perhaps now when you look at it with the benefit of hindsight, Spurs maybe missed that opportunity. They could have sold Lucas. They could have, loaned out Hill. Like there was an opportunity to get a backup to Kulusevski that they truly knew in case Kulusevski got hurt, the 3-4-3 would still work, would still function, etc. And I now look at that. I'm like, oh, that's kind of fascinating. Like that's one that we definitely, maybe overlooked. That's something that we didn't think about, at least myself, because I kind of thought that Kulusevski was just going to be okay. I did think that Richarlison could fill in. I did think that Lucas would be healthy as well, and that would be okay. But now I think about it, you know what? Maybe that was kind of a bit nearsighted. And it then also goes to the defense now. Now we're like, Dyer, like, can we really only have one center back that's like specialized for this role? Maybe we kind of overlooked that, or at least some of us did, some of us didn't. That's kind of the conversation, Sean, I'm always willing to have. And I actually have a lot of fun having that kind of conversation because it is kind of the whole like, you know what? This is what we need to address next time. This is maybe what we could have done better. Instead of just like the, why didn't we buy Sergei Milinkovic-Savic sort of conversation where then I'm just kind of like, this is, it's just sort of, I'm well entitled to listen to people with what we did wrong and bring up the areas that we missed. I just don't like sometimes when it's like, we didn't improve the quality of the squad, conversations like that. And it's kind of like, well, we did because compared to last season, we only had Ben Davies. Now we have Ben Davies and Longley to choose from. Last season, we only had Harry Kane. Now we have Harry Kane and Richarlison to choose from. And I just find those sort of arguments, then it starts to become a bit, I can't debate. Like, if you get what I'm saying, like I can't
Yeah,
debate with that
Jack,
when
and the
it
other
becomes
thing,
that sort of statement. I am willing to debate that we didn't address the defense maybe enough. I actually love that sort of debate. I think it's a good one to have, and it's a good conversation. The one I don't enjoy having is when you do hear this blanket statements, as maybe
yeah,
they're
blanket
called,
statements are always
of like,
problematic.
we didn't
Yeah.
improve the squad, the same 11 is the same, etc., etc. And it's like, come on.
I'll tell you one
That's
thing I
not
would say,
fair.
Jack, is that, I hear a lot of, have you looked at the bench tonight? Right? Have you looked at the bench? Well, where's our options? And to me, like, whilst, regardless of whether you think that Richarlison's good, I personally, I haven't been a fan of Richarlison. I wasn't
Yeah.
a fan of Richarlison signing. Like Lucas Moura, some people love the guy. Some people think he flatters to deceive. Some people think he's, he can't pass wind, etc. Like there's a whole bunch of different, and Brian Hill, etc. also has a massive spectrum of opinions. But what I would say is you can't, if you have only 5 or 6, forwards, you've only got space for 6 forwards in your starting squad of 25. You can't have more than that. Otherwise, somewhere else you have only one
Also hard to
player
have 6
in that position.
Kulusevskis.
If you have 6, but if you have 6 players in that, even if you have, if you have 6 Kulusevskis, or even if you just have the players that we have, if 3 of them get injured in the
You're gonna look bare.
you're gonna look bare, right? Like you can't have like.
This happened at Liverpool, and we forgot about it too. They lost Van Dijk and they lost Matip. Look, all of a sudden they were like, "Wow, look at that defense! Who knew?"
Yeah, it's so leaky, it's so shaky. There's a reason, bro. There's a reason.
That's actually so funny. That was the light bulb that popped in my head, was when Liverpool had that atrocious season that everybody spoke about, when they barely made it into top 4. They barely made it in. And it was because they were like, "Oh my gosh, who knew they didn't have a backup for Virgil van Dijk?" And it's like, yeah, not many do. Not many do.
But like, you can't have, like, if Tottenham were to lose Sonny as well as Decky, as well as Kulusevski, and as well as Lucas Moura at the same time, like, you can't expect a team to have. There'd be fan base that would go, "Look at the bench. Like, we got to play Brian Hill and Harry Kane. This is depth for you. This is the lack of depth." No, bro. Like, you've got 4 players in the same position.
If it were like a chess analogy,
you can't do it.
You're starting the game without a queen, a bishop, and a rook, basically.
Yeah.
It's like that sort of, and it's like, oh, well, look at the pieces. Like, how do we not have
all you've
more?
got is pawns. Yeah.
Like, we're already starting 3 pieces down. Like, we're already starting 3 pieces down. I know exactly what you're saying.
Context. Everyone needs to bake some context in. The last thing I'll say is, everyone's super depressed about the fact we lost to Manchester United. To get back to it, like, Manchester United away is a game we often lose. We haven't played anybody of the top 6 at home yet, and we've got a 10 out of 10. Last game's 30 points from 30 points in the Premier League,
and we've had
at home
second or third hardest fixture schedule as well.
Second and hard third. It's like, when these guys cut, like, the big one is Newcastle on Sunday. If we beat Newcastle on Sunday, everything's back on track. Everyone needs to get back behind it and stop being so panicking. And then we've got Liverpool in 2 weeks' time
against Man U as well. I said the same thing. A team that got a great result against Man United, if we end up then beating them, it sort of then just makes you, I'll be honest, even more confused. But also at least makes you know that it's not complete alarm bells at the same time. Not
if we set up against Newcastle at home and play some version of like 5-4-1 when we don't have the ball, and do something similar, and then we end up getting pipped 1-0 at home against Newcastle, for sure, then there's discussions to be had around what's going on. But as of right now, all that's happened is we've lost a game we usually lose, just like at Arsenal, away from home. Tottenham are never good away against the top 6 at home. But let's see what happens against Newcastle at home, and then let's see what happens when Liverpool come to town in 2 weeks' time. And if we can continue our home form, then this conversation needs to be put to bed. And like, you're not going to go through the season undefeated, and losing to Manchester United away is not any real disgrace. It was a real shame and an unacceptable level of grit and determination. But in the grand scheme of things, you're not going to win every game, and away at Manchester United is not that unordinary.
Mm. Beautifully put there, Sean. And seems like the conclusion about Newcastle is you're either going to leave with alarm bells or you're going to leave confused. So
Yeah, yeah.
basically, two good results for Spurs fans, but and actually probably a very common feeling for Spurs fans leaving confused or with alarm bells. So there you are, everybody. Sean, thank you very much for filling in for Dave
Thanks,
today.
buddy.
We're gonna tag your channel, put in the stuff in the comments, all that sort of good stuff. And
Thanks,
thank
mate.
you for filling in on the podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I
Yeah, I
know it
loved
is
it.
kind of not as well structured as we usually do on these shows, but that is kind of the whole point, a different sort of vibe and a different sort of conversation.
It's a great conversation, Jack. Thanks for having me, man. I look forward to doing it again whenever you need me.
Alrighty. Maybe who knows? Might be with Dave next time instead of myself. See how that one goes. But everybody, on your way out, do hit that like button. You're watching on YouTube, and if you're watching on Spotify and all that good stuff, we'll see you next time. Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.